So in this video, we're just going to talk about direct and indirect data sources. Just let me know if you have any questions about what you see in this video. So what is a direct data source? So a direct data source is one that data can be gathered from without having to go to a third party. It gives us data that is often called original source data. So just an example, if let's say we have a sports shop that wants to find out how much a certain product is selling at other shops, how can they go about to find this information? So in this example, we have three ways that they can do this. They could visit other shops and note the prices. They could visit websites, or in other words, online shops, and note the prices there. Or they can just give other shops a survey asking about their prices. So in this example, they can find this information without having to go to a third party to gather this type of info. So what is an indirect data source? So an indirect source or data source means that data was collected for a particular reason but is then used for something else. So we're going to have a look at some examples on the next slide to try and make this a bit clearer. So example of direct and indirect data sources. So in terms of weather, data loggers are set up all over the country to measure local weather conditions. All this data is gathered together to allow weather forecasts to be made. So this is an example of direct data source. So information was collected for the specific purpose of allowing weather forecasts. So how does this data here become an indirect data source? So this bullet says, but this data set may also be purchased by a local business who wants to see how sales of the ice cream relates to the weather. This information is used to plan ice cream production ahead of time. So in this example, this information is an indirect data source. So this ice cream business can use the information that was collected for the purpose of weather forecasts to help them plan their ice cream production. So it becomes an indirect data source when someone uses information that was not specifically collected for the purpose that they are using it for. So in this example, they are using the weather information collected that was collected for weather forecasts and not for ice cream production. So therefore that's indirect data source. If you look at another example, electoral register. By law, all residents must provide details of who is living in the house or flat, how old they are, and their gender. The purpose of this data gathering is to allow local authorities to handle voting in political elections. So this is an example of a direct data source. So this information is collected for the purpose of voting. But with the person's permission, some of the list can be sold to commercial firms, such as a marketing company planning a new mail shot campaign. So in this case, it would be indirect data in relation to the marketing company. So the marketing company here will use information that was originally collected for voting purposes, and they'll use that information for their marketing campaign. So that is why it's an indirect data source for the marketing campaign, but for the local authorities, it's a direct data source because that information was collected for the purpose of voting. So just to compare direct and indirect data sources, so there are quite a few points in this slide. Let's try to go through them as quick as we can. So for direct data source, the data will be relevant because what is needed has been collected. The original source is known and so can be trusted. It can take a long time to gather original data rather than use data that already exists. A large sample of statistical data that can be difficult to collect for one-off purposes. The data is likely to be up to date because it has been collected recently. Bias can be eliminated by asking specific questions, and the data can be collected and presented in the format required. For indirect data sources, additional data that is not required will exist, They may take time to sort through, and some data that is required may not exist. The original source may not be known, and so it can't be assumed that it is reliable. The data is immediately available. If statistical analysis is required, then there are more likely to be large samples available. Data may be out of date because it was collected at a different time. Original data may be biased due to its source. And lastly, the data is unlikely to be in the format required, which may make extracting the data difficult. Alright, that's the end of the lesson. I hope that was okay. Please let me know if you have any questions.